There comes a moment in every toxic relationship that feels almost silent, but it changes everything. Nothing breaks in front of you. No alarm goes off. No one announces it. But inside you, something settles. You stop explaining away what hurt you. You stop calling cruelty confusion. You stop turning your pain into patience just to keep the peace. And the second that happens, the other person feels it. They may not say it out loud. They may never admit it, but they know. They know you see clearly now. They know the old tricks are starting to fade. They know you are no longer standing in front of them the same way. And that is the moment everything shifts. Not because they suddenly become honest, but because guilt, when it gets too close, makes them dangerous in very quiet ways. Stay with me because this part matters. If you have ever felt the cold silence, the strange rage, the twisted stories, or the sudden distance that came right after you found your clarity, then you already know this feeling in your bones. What happens next is not random. It is a pattern, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Listen closely because this may put words to something you have carried for a long time. For most people, guilt is painful but useful. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it points somewhere honest. It says something is off. Something was wrong. Something needs to be faced. It can lead to reflection. It can lead to repair. It can even lead to growth. But for a narcissistic person, guilt does not feel like a signal. It feels like a threat, a deep one, because their identity is not built on truth, humility, or real self-awareness. It is built on image, on control, on being right, on being admired, on staying above blame. So when guilt gets close, it does not simply challenge a behavior. It shakes the entire structure holding their identity together. To admit they caused harm would mean admitting they are flawed, limited, maybe even ordinary. And to them, that does not feel human. It feels unbearable. That is why guilt rarely becomes remorse in them. Remorse needs a stable self. It needs the inner strength to say, I was wrong, but I can still face myself. A narcissistic person often does not have that safety inside. So guilt turns into panic. Panic turns into defense. Defense turns into blame, denial, coldness, performance, and attack. This is why logic often fails. This is why evidence changes nothing. You are not just pointing to a bad action. You are touching the one thing they will do almost anything to avoid. Once that image feels threatened, they shift fast. What once looked warm, charming, attentive, even loving, starts to harden. The smile is still there sometimes, but it does not land the same. The words may still sound smooth, but something underneath them changes. What used to feel like connection starts to feel like management. This is where many people get confused because at first, the charm felt so real. It felt special. It felt like closeness. It felt like being chosen. But charm was never the same thing as intimacy. It was access. It was influence. It was the doorway to your trust. And once trust turns into awareness, charm no longer works the way it used to. So they reach for something stronger, control. Suddenly, conversations are not conversations anymore. They are traps. You are interrupted more. Your meaning gets twisted. Simple comments become long debates. Your tone becomes the topic. Your memory becomes suspicious. Your feelings become evidence against you. And the more clearly you speak, the more they try to pin you down with confusion. This is not because you said something wrong. It is because you said something true. Watch this pattern closely. It changes everything. They may withhold affection, shift the goalpost, go emotionally cold, or start speaking to you like they are cross-examining you instead of knowing you. That is not love becoming complicated. That is control replacing charm. And when you finally see that, self-blame starts to lose its grip. Then comes the stage that breaks many people from the inside if they do not understand what is happening. Denial becomes the shield. Projection becomes the weapon. Reality itself starts to feel unsafe. At this point, they are not trying to solve the problem. They are trying to survive exposure. Admitting what happened would mean touching guilt. And guilt still feels like collapse. So they deny the basic truth of your experience. What happened gets minimized. The cruel moment becomes a misunderstanding. The lie becomes your sensitivity. The betrayal becomes your overreaction. The pattern becomes a one-time mistake. They do not do this softly. They do it with confidence. And that confidence is part of the strategy because certainty can make honest people doubt themselves. When someone looks at your pain and denies it with total conviction, something inside you starts replaying every detail. You question your memory. You review your tone. You wonder if maybe you were too emotional, too tired, too triggered, too something. That confusion is not accidental. It is the point. And once doubt enters, projection follows. Suddenly, the very traits they will not own get placed onto you. You are the manipulative one. You are selfish. You are dramatic. You are impossible. You are controlling. Sometimes they even use the same words you once used to describe their behavior, then throw them back at you like a mirror turned inside out. This part is brutal because it feels so personal. They do not just accuse. They aim for what you care most about, your values, your intentions, your decency. They strike where your conscience lives because that is where the damage goes deepest. When denial and projection start to lose power, they usually reach for silence, rage, or victimhood. Not because they are confused and not because they are deeply reflecting, but because those responses can still move the emotional spotlight away from accountability. Silence often comes first. Messages stop. Warmth disappears. A conversation ends in the middle of the truth. You are left staring at the emptiness, wondering what just happened. But this silence is not peaceful distance. It is pressure. It is meant to make you uncomfortable enough to chase, explain, soften, apologize, or abandon your clarity just to restore connection. If silence does not work, rage may arrive. It does not always look explosive. Sometimes it is icy, sharp, surgical anger. Sometimes it is loud and chaotic. Sometimes it is just enough hostility to throw your nervous system into defense mode. And once that happens, the original issue gets buried. Now the focus is your reaction, your tone, your words, your timing, your face, your energy. Truth disappears inside the storm. And if even rage stops pulling you back in, victimhood takes the stage. Suddenly, they are the wounded one. They are the misunderstood one. They are the one being attacked. Your boundaries become cruelty. Your honesty becomes betrayal. Your refusal to carry their guilt becomes evidence that you are heartless. And this is where so many people fold. Not because they are weak, but because they are humane. They still want fairness. They still want understanding. They still think if they just explain one more time, something honest might land. But this is the trap. The cycle survives on your need to be understood by someone invested in not understanding you. Then something even more disturbing can happen. They start rewriting the past. Not a little, completely. History becomes flexible. Memory becomes a tool. What they promised was never really promised. What they said was taken the wrong way. What hurt you was concern. What felt cruel was just stress. What broke trust was necessary. Little by little, the lived reality you remember gets replaced by a cleaner story that protects them from shame. And the longer this goes on, the more exhausted you become because you are not just dealing with present harm anymore. You are fighting for the right to remember your own life. This is one of the deepest fractures these dynamics create. Not just the pain of what happened, but the pressure to abandon your own memory to keep the relationship intact. If you challenge the new story, you may be told you are stuck in the past, holding grudges, refusing to move on. But moving on in this setup usually means one thing. Agree to their version of reality and stop asking for truth. That is why this stage feels so disorienting. You know what happened. Your body remembers. Your nervous system remembers. The silence, the dread, the moment you went quiet just to stay safe. The way your chest tightened. The way you learned to scan every mood. You remember all of it. And still you are asked to doubt yourself. This is why trusting your own memory again becomes a radical act. It is not petty. It is not stubborn. It is survival. The moment you stop begging them to confirm what you already know, something powerful begins to return to you. And what returns first is clarity. Quiet, steady, clean clarity. Not rage, not revenge, not even perfect certainty all at once. Just a calm knowing that starts getting stronger every time you stop arguing with distortion. And clarity is one of the most threatening things to a narcissistic person. Confusion they can work with, self-doubt they can shape, emotional reactions they can provoke and then use, but clarity gives them very little to hold. It does not beg. It does not over-explain. It does not need permission. It just stands there. And that is why your calmness can unsettle them more than your anger ever did. When you stop asking, "Did I imagine this?" and start saying quietly to yourself, "I know what I lived," the whole dynamic starts losing oxygen. They feel that immediately. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You stop defending every feeling. You stop filling every silence. You stop reacting on cue. You set a boundary without writing an essay about it. And this shift is huge because it tells them something they do not want to accept. They are no longer the authority over your reality. That is often when they test you again. They bait. They become extra confusing, extra charming, extra cold, or suddenly emotional. Not because they want healing, but because they want proof that they can still move you. And if this part feels familiar, stay with me because this is where many people finally begin to understand that the issue was never love lost. It was influence lost. Once your clarity remains steady, punishment often follows. Maybe not loudly, maybe not in ways anyone else can easily see, but it becomes precise. Affection is withdrawn. Warmth becomes selective. Access to kindness suddenly feels conditional. Peace is offered only if you stop naming what is true. This is the unspoken message. If you want closeness, comfort, relief, then surrender your truth. Sometimes the punishment looks like chaos, sudden problems, strange conflicts, emotional whiplash. A crisis appears the second you begin standing still in your awareness. Why? Because chaos pulls your mind away from truth and back into survival. And survival mode is easier to control. When life feels unstable, it becomes harder to hold on to clarity. That instability is not always accidental. They may become unpredictable, inconsistent, or detached in ways that hit exactly where you are tender. They may act indifferent at moments that matter deeply. They may offer just enough warmth to keep you hoping and then pull it back the second you begin to trust it. This creates emotional hunger, and emotional hunger makes people easier to bend. But here's the turning point. The punishment only works if you still believe that what is being withheld was love. The moment you recognize the pattern, the meaning changes. You stop scrambling to earn back what should never have been conditional in the first place. You stop treating withdrawal like a verdict on your worth. You start seeing it for what it is, leverage. And once you see leverage clearly, it weakens because now you understand that losing false closeness is not the same as losing real connection. One was built on your compliance, the other would have survived your honesty. A lot of people still hold on at this point because they hope guilt will soften the other person. They think maybe if the truth becomes undeniable enough, some real remorse will finally appear. Maybe the defenses will crack. Maybe the humanity underneath it all will rise. Maybe this time they will really see the damage. But that hope, while deeply human, often keeps people trapped much longer than they realize. Because guilt does not usually melt narcissistic defenses. It hardens them. The closer they get to shame, the more rigid they often become. The colder, the more polished, the more strategic, or sometimes more performative, more perfect, more controlled, as if they are rebuilding the role all over again in front of your eyes. This is not healing. It is reinforcement. They are doubling down on the traits that protect them from self-reflection. Conversations start sounding rehearsed. Empathy feels thin, temporary, borrowed. Any apology arrives shallow and then quickly shifts into explanation, minimization, or blame. Even their softness can feel like a tactic now. And the painful truth is this. It is not because you lacked patience, compassion, intelligence, or the right words. It is because real accountability would require them to sit in a kind of inner vulnerability they experience as intolerable. So they choose defense over growth, image over intimacy, control over closeness. And once you truly understand that, something inside you begins to loosen. Not because it feels good, but because it finally feels clear. You stop waiting for a breakthrough that depends on them becoming someone they keep showing you they do not want to be. That is when grief often arrives. Quiet grief, heavy grief, not just grief for the harm, but for the fantasy, for the version of the relationship you kept trying to save. For the hope that if you loved well enough, explained gently enough, endured long enough, some stable truth would finally emerge. Let this sink in because this changes everything. Many people are not only grieving what happened, they are grieving what never truly existed. The way they believed it did, the future they imagined, the safety they tried to build, the tenderness they kept waiting to become consistent. And grieving that can feel strange because the person is still there, yet the truth of the bond starts falling apart in your hands. But this grief is not weakness. It is the beginning of release. Because when the fantasy starts dissolving, you stop spending your life trying to earn from them what they only offered when it served them. You stop calling crumbs a meal. You stop mistaking intensity for care. You stop measuring your worth by how much emotional pain you can carry without breaking. And as hard as that grief feels, it opens a door. On the other side is a version of you that is no longer built around managing someone else's fragility. No longer trained to anticipate moods, soften truth, shrink needs, or doubt your instincts. No longer living inside a story where your role was to absorb damage and still call it love. This is where freedom first begins to feel possible. Not dramatic, just possible. And sometimes that small possibility is the first real breath a person has taken in years. Then the bigger realization arrives. Their reactions were never random. They were signals. The denial, the rage, the silence, the rewritten history, the punishment, the coldness, the false victimhood, the polished performance after harm. All of it was a response to one thing. Your awakening. Not your cruelty, not your demands, not your tone, your awareness. Things got worse because you saw more. You stopped carrying blame that did not belong to you. You stopped reshaping reality to preserve the relationship. You started recognizing patterns instead of excuses, and that changed the entire system because you were never meant to be fully awake inside that dynamic. You were supposed to doubt yourself, to keep explaining, to keep hoping, to keep doing the emotional labor so they would never have to face themselves. The moment you stepped out of that role, the structure started failing. That is why the resistance intensified. Growth disrupts systems built on imbalance. Clarity weakens roles that depend on confusion. And once you see that, something else becomes possible. You stop personalizing their reaction. You stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And start seeing this is happening because I no longer fit the role that kept this working. That shift matters a lot because it takes their behavior out of the center of your identity. It stops their response from becoming proof that you are wrong. Instead, it becomes proof that you changed the rules by waking up. And when you really understand that, the final truth begins to settle. What they feared most was not being exposed in some dramatic public way. It was losing access to you, not just your presence, but your openness, your emotional availability, your willingness to stay engaged, your habit of returning, your tendency to explain, your hope, your energy, your attention. Because those things fed the system. Those things gave them room to keep shaping the emotional landscape around them. But once you stop handing over your inner peace, the dynamic starts ending in a way they cannot fully control. Your peace becomes the one boundary they cannot argue with. It does not need debate. It does not need proof. It does not need them to understand. It simply exists outside their reach. And this can be one of the hardest consequences for them to face. Not because you destroyed them, not because you punished them, but because you stopped orbiting their moods. You stopped seeking permission to trust yourself. You stopped reacting on command. You stopped offering your nervous system as a place for them to dump what they would not face in themselves. Deep down, whether they admit it or not, they know when that access is gone. They know something shifted. And the shift is permanent. Not because you became colder, but because you became whole enough to stop confusing chaos with connection. That is why peace can feel so unfamiliar at first. Many people think healing will feel dramatic, loud, triumphant, full of instant relief. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes it feels almost boring in the beginning. Quiet, still unadorned. No sharp highs, no crushing lows, no endless deep coding, no walking into a room and checking the emotional weather before you breathe. No rehearsing what to say in case the mood turns. No shrinking your truth to avoid punishment. At first, that steadiness can even feel empty if your body got used to intensity. But stay with that feeling. Do not run back to noise just because silence feels strange. Peace often arrives softly. It does not perform. It does not chase. It does not force you to disappear so someone else can stay comfortable. It gives your mind room. It gives your body rest. It lets your intuition come back online. And little by little, you begin to notice simple things. You think more clearly. You explain less. You sleep a little deeper. You trust your memory faster. You stop needing immediate reassurance to believe what you feel. You stop calling your instincts dramatic. You stop treating your own pain like weak evidence. This is healing. Not flashy, not perfect, but real. And this is important, so hear it clearly. You do not need their admission of guilt to move forward. You do not need the perfect apology. You do not need them to finally say exactly what happened. Closure does not always come from their honesty. Often it comes from your understanding, from seeing the pattern clearly enough that